So a couple of months ago, I had a breakup.
So like any self-respecting man, I hit the gym, hit the books, got a new car, a higher paying job, and a new, way hotter, sexier girlfriend who totally cooks for me. In other
I
words,
handled it like a champion. Because you know what? No matter how many times I get hit, I always get back up.
Yeah, nah, just kidding. Most importantly though, I ate a lot of ice cream and rewatched the first 2 seasons of the 7 Deadly Sins. Only the first 2 seasons though, we don't talk about anything that came after that. Anyway, I've been back-to-back relationships for like the past 8 years, and I realized every time I go through a breakup, I always come back to one particular episode, and that's the trials from season 2.
which was easily one of the best training arcs I have ever seen. It damn well made me cry.
But not this man. Get back in there, Tia.
Mainly because I genuinely love this woman, but there was a darkness within me that I hadn't quite dealt with, and I couldn't love her the way she deserved to be loved. Losing her sent me in a clusterfuck of emotion. What I saw in this episode was an internal process I see in myself. The trials of Meliodas, the main character. The Sin of Wrath, his romantic arc serves as a modern mythology. It's a loose framework, honestly, of the transformation that the masculine spirit undergoes, and in some cases must undergo. So let's set the stage, which is contextually important to the story, though the mechanics is what is functionally most important. And Meliodas is a son of the Demon King. He fell in love with Elizabeth, daughter of the supreme deity, so basically the goddess, a goddess. Talk about your classic Romeo and Juliet situation, but this time with cosmological consequences. So Meliodas abandons his role as the leader of the demon clan to pursue his love for Elizabeth, and they're both cursed.
Somehow, my wounded body had healed back to normal again. But it wasn't the same for her. Until one day, there she was. Elizabeth was back. She was supposed to be dead, but she was standing right in front of me. It seemed impossible, but it was true. She didn't have wings, but I knew it was her. My heart was so full. But it was one-sided. I was sure of it. She really was the reincarnation of my Elizabeth. For her to be reborn and have the same looks, voice, name. 3 days later, Elizabeth died. Right in front of me.
The curses that your father and my mother put on us are almost unthinkable. Eternal life and eternal reincarnation. You'll never age again, and even if you die, you'll only be resurrected. I'll live short lives as a human, one after another. And each time, I'll forget everything about my past life. I'm going to meet you every time I'm reincarnated, and fall in love with you. Then, without fail, I'll lose my life right before your eyes.
The gods and goddesses, heroes and demons are not to be understood as literal personalities, but as metaphors for eternal aspects of the human psyche. Their stories represent psychological realities that are common to all humanity. It's Joseph Campbell. So whenever we encounter stories of divine and supernatural beings, they often serve to elevate the story beyond mere fiction and into the realm of psychological truths. Meliodas was cursed with resurrection, where he'd get sent to purgatory and eventually he'd come back, but each time leaving a part of his soul, his emotions behind. Thus, he would slowly revert back to his former cold, ruthless leader of the demon clan army self of his that he once was. I saw this process as that reflexive chip on the shoulder, that attitude us guys have when we have a relationship that just falls through. So Elizabeth was cursed with reincarnation as a human from birth to old age. If she didn't die in other ways, that is. Only to reincarnate again and again and again after every death. Obviously, though, from the perspective of the guy, this looks a lot like how a woman move on after a relationship. If and when a woman decides to end a relationship, you're cooked. She will hit you with the and that version of her might as well be dead. So this cycle would go on for about 2,000 years in this story, creating an excruciating pattern where Meliodas must repeatedly witness the death of his beloved, each time losing just a little bit more of his emotional stability, ultimately unleashing his darker half, his wrath. His struggle to maintain his emotions while facing repeated loss mirrors the modern man's challenge in remaining emotionally available after each failed relationship with their Elizabeth at the time, a woman he loves. Again, obviously, I'm focusing on the male point of view here. The rebirth of Elizabeth is similar to every new relationship. And the spirit of Elizabeth is that feminine energy, archetype. In other words, the spirit that is consistent across all women. The traits, attributes, personality that goes along with it. The intangibles. Obviously, every girlfriend I had embodied this spirit uniquely through their personality and character. Each death of Elizabeth is a lot like the death of each relationship, in other words. Each time I lost a relationship, I felt like I lost a part of myself, some part of my identity, especially when I truly loved them. Every man carries within him the eternal image of a woman, not the image of this or that particular woman, but a definitive feminine image. This image is fundamentally unconscious, a hereditary factor of primordial origin. That's by Carl Jung. Each new relationship represents a fresh incarnation of the anima, that eternal feminine spirit. The life of these relationships mirrors Elizabeth's cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. With each ending, that particular expression of the anima dies, only to be reborn later in a new form, in a new love. It's both beautiful and tragic. Just as Meliodas carried the weight of remembering every death of Elizabeth, I felt like I carried the emotional memory of each lost connection, each failed attempt at preserving that sacred bond.
Once in a while it crosses my mind that if I'd never met you, these completely ordinary days we share would never make me feel so happy.
Again. I try, but I can't stop it. I'm so sorry, Elizabeth.
The anima doesn't just represent our romantic ideals within us men, it represents our capacity to relate to the feminine aspects within ourselves, our emotional depth, our intuition, our capacity for nurturing connections. When a relationship ends, we don't just lose a partner, we temporarily lose access to these parts of ourselves, much like Meliodas losing parts of his emotion, his soul. Each time I loved and lost, I was forced to become more detached. Similarly, when Meliodas dies, he loses himself and becomes a darker, colder version of himself. This mirrors men in modern dating. When our Elizabeth dies, it represents the death of both that relationship and ourselves, a version of ourself. Now, I want to quickly say the best thing you can do after a relationship is to truly heal and integrate the experience. One of my biggest mistakes is I would sort of heal, and then I would find myself back in a relationship. The longer you postpone that process, the more of it there is to deal with later. And this always comes out one way or another. In the show, Meliodas earned his name as a sin of wrath for losing emotional control and unleashing the full extent of his powers, destroying a whole city. So naturally, it seems like the only way forward is to adopt a stoic, non-attached form of love. And I think in retrospect, I may have overdone it because I went from being, committed in relationships to dating multiple women at the same time. I went full-blown Andrew Tate with it. And yet gradually, I realized I couldn't love my one true Elizabeth anymore. By that, I mean I lost someone I truly wanted to be my wife. I felt I lost my Elizabeth for the last time. And truth be told, I did. And yet, as Beatrice would act as a guide and an inspiration for Dante's journey out of hell, the prospect of finding my one true Elizabeth, my next Elizabeth, calls out to me. So, after Meliodas would earn his title, the Sin of Wrath, recognizing the lack of emotional control, he would come to make a profound decision to relinquish his powers into a vessel. He's going to put it away for later. Here I felt the show was now demonstrating the quiet parts of Jungian shadow out loud. This darkness, his demonic powers, represents access to his shadow, a concept that becomes increasingly significant as we move into the trials. Like Meliodas, I felt like I was incapable of wielding my shadow, my powers, and there is some truth to that. I didn't have the psychic instruments, maturity, the wisdom yet necessary to integrate my shadow. So I would return to a more sizable, manageable version of myself. The shadow consists of those aspects of your character that belong to you, but that have not been given any conscious place in your life. Assimilating one's shadow is the art of catching up those facets of life that have not been honored or lived out adequately. That's from Transformations by Robert A. Johnson. There is inevitably a time in every man's life where he must reclaim his powers. In other words, assimilate and integrate his shadow self into his conscious being. In this regard, the shadow's immense scope is due to the deep love for another, like Meliodas has for Elizabeth. Namely, all that life that hadn't received your love, attention, time, care, diligence, energy, and presence. Not that it was wasted, per se, but the love and life you had with your Elizabeth, who acted as its vessel, is now daunting and painfully, infinitely void. That love, that life has nowhere to go. So this process of integration, though challenging and often painful, will be necessary. Meliodas provides a framework for this very problem. No one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. In the most emotionally charged moment of this series, the trial, Meliodas must confront the final devastating loss to regain the powers he relinquished.
Was everything I saw just an illusion? Rain? Hey, Liz?
Hey, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost.
So, all part of my test, huh?
The trial cruelly but necessarily strips away all his defensive walls, compelling him to relive that season with Elizabeth in excruciating detail. It forces him to face not just the memory and pain of losing Elizabeth, but the raw, uncontrolled rage that consumed him in its wake.
The tranquil days and the cruel ones spent parting from the person he was in love with. He's repeating them hundreds, if not thousands of times. With each instance, Meliodas is consumed by wrath, loses control, and destroys everything around him.
We cannot selectively numb our pain without also limiting our potential for love. Just as Meliodas must face his darkest moment to reclaim his power, his full potential. It is so difficult that even the fairy who is conducting his trials thinks that the only way he'd pass is to kill all his emotions.
I'm back! Why'd you pull me out of there?
Isn't it obvious? You're still unable to suppress your wrath, repeating the cycle of mayhem and destruction over and over. If this continues, rather than emotions, your spirit is what will die.
So Meliodas initially struggles dearly to pass the test, and nearly flakes on his test.
Nobody's blaming you for anything. No matter how many times the odds were stacked against you, you've always risked your life to fight for us, Sir Meliodas. See?
Yet it is the warmth and the gentle support of his current incarnate, Elizabeth, that accesses Beatrice and inspires him to keep trying.
I have to become stronger for the ones I need to protect.
And so, like Meliodas, my first attempt to reclaim my power was to simply force myself to let go, mainly by forgetting. Or as Meliodas would say, to try to get used to it. And this is done mainly at an intellectual level. And this too ends in failure because it is in effect an avoidance strategy. And until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
I just can't do it. Forgetting about you isn't possible. Get used to losing you in a way. Each time I repeat meeting and saying goodbye to you, my love grows so strong I can't contain it. My wrath grows so strong I can't contain it! It's impossible.
Finally, Meliodas recognizes his nature through the trials. He brings forth into full conscious awareness the good and bad. He accepts his ever-growing love for Elizabeth, his uncontrollable wrath, and no longer tries to forget about it. He shows us the way forward by a radical acceptance of his growing love and his capability for destruction, vowing to never allow it to happen again.
Once in a while it crosses my mind that if I'd never met you, these completely ordinary days we share would never make me feel so happy. It wouldn't be the same.
I feel exactly the same way. That's why I never want to see this sight again. I can't take it. I don't want to repeat it. Never again! No matter what! Whoa, Elizabeth. What's all this crying about?
Oh, sorry. When I saw your tears, they just started flowing.
What? I don't know what you mean.
So when Meliodas finally gets his powers back, he immediately wants to go kick some demon butt. This was one of the best power-ups I have ever witnessed in anime. He schools Galen, walking up to his mortal enemies with the S-Class level 10 aura, making it clear that something is different. He has undergone a spiritual and emotional transformation. The trial's completion symbolizes the restoration of wholeness.
The wrath inside him has gone through a change. His old wrath would send him on a rampage, destroying everything in his sight. But this new one consumes everything silently, like a deep sea. Though it still exists, he has complete control over his rage now.
I find a spiritual reflection of myself in Meliodas' trials because it is so damn relatable. And I recognized this pattern years ago, but only now finally decided to do this deeper analysis. I've had many breakups and only barely inspired me to create this. Losing who I thought would be my one true Elizabeth has no doubt made me want to create a path forward for myself through this analysis, and most importantly, for my brothers. So clearly I'm going to be making some different kinds of videos moving forward. And if this is up your alley, please like, comment, or subscribe. It helps me know what works and what doesn't. Otherwise, the support is always welcome. But if this is your cup of tea, I do have
3 book recommendations that I highly recommend. So the first one up is Enter Through the Image. It is on the ancient image language of myth, art, and dreams. One of my personal favorites. And the second one is The Divine Within by Aldous Huxley. It's selected writings on the Western concept of enlightenment. Third up, last but not least, is Joseph Campbell's The Inner Reaches of Outer Space, metaphor as myth and as religion. A great way to start is this. It's nice and compact. You can read it in one go. But yeah, alrighty guys, till next time.